Hello and welcome to PFF Fantasy Football Podcast. I'm your host, Ian Hartitz. Happy Thursday. We got some ball to talk about on this edition of the PFF Fantasy Football Podcast. We want to talk about a loaded weekend for all things DFS and also go over some player props from the prop prophet himself, none other than PFF's own Andrew Erickson. Andrew, happy Wild Card weekend, man.
Happy Wild Card weekend. I tried to get a little wild with my lunch today. I had a frozen burrito, and I'll just say that it's probably the first time dabbling into the frozen food aisle of the burritos, and it's probably going to be my last, honestly. It did not taste nearly as good as it looked like on the bag. You're like, oh man, this looks like the most amazing thing. I get into it, and it really tasted kind of like cardboard. It was not good. So count me out on frozen burritos, but in on Wild Card weekend.
That's a nice wild card. My wild card was active water bursting through my apartment ceiling mid-episode, and then my apartment complex, the lovely Drexel at Oakley on Paxton Avenue in Cincinnati, Ohio, telling me that, that's tough luck. They don't do discounts. They're going to try to fix the problem eventually. So any of you Cincinnatians looking to move into Drexel at Oakley, let me be the first to tell you, please save yourself, because you could not pick a worse place to live. So with that off my chest, Andrew, let's talk some goodness with the DFS. Now we have slates all over the place. You can do your Saturday through Monday. You can do individual 2 games, your 3 gamer on Sunday. It really is, dealer's choice in terms of what you want to do. So we're not going to do quite as traditional of an episode. We go through cash and turn because again, there are so many different slates to go through. So more than anything, Andrew, I tried to pick 4 kind of key takeaways I've been able to gather throughout my research all during the week. And I know you have some specific plays that you're looking to get into as well. And then again, as always, we'll finish it off with some player prop goodness. But getting after it first, man, I think the first thing I noticed really looking at these lineups, we don't need a ton of salary saving choice because all the running backs got priced down a good amount as it is. And other than Cooper Kupp, you don't have to pay up that much for wide receivers. All the 49ers seemingly got discounts. But Zay Jones at 4,200, man, he just seems like the cheap wide receiver that if you're looking to get your 5 catches, can't have a goose egg, but we just need to save some salary here. Maybe we get a little bit of upside too. I don't see how it can't be Zay Jones at 4,200. Again, 5 receptions in 5 consecutive games. And he's been getting a lot of the air yards. Hasn't necessarily been coming down with them, but again, based on the Bengals probably being able to play with a lead, if their status as 5.5 point favorites means anything, you would expect Zay Jones, even with Waller back in the picture, to continue to really dominate a lot of those outside targets. There are some other cheap options though. We got Tyler Johnson sitting pretty, 13 targets over the last 2 weeks. It annoyed me, Andrew, because I was all in on Tyler Johnson the first week after Godwin was out when he goose eggs, and then he actually starts getting the usage that we were kind of expecting from the beginning over the past 2 weeks. So Tyler is back on the come up. Just make sure you keep an eye on that Tampa weather. Would also note that last week with Tyreek Hill banged up, it was Mecole Hardman 83% snaps, Byron Pringle 71% snaps, and Demarcus Robinson 53%. So Mecole or Byron are probably your 2 best darts there. Juwan Jennings at 3.8K. I see the allure. Keep an eye on Mohamed Sanu though. They opened up his practice window in week 18. He was their starting slot before he got injured. I think Jennings has played very well with his opportunities, but come on, it's Kyle Shanahan. We know that this guy has player personnel choices that maybe we don't exactly see coming. So if we do see Mohamed Sanu activated, it at a minimum could be like a situation, in Buffalo where we have McKenzie and Beasley kind of splitting reps in the slot, something I probably expect in San Fran. Ray McLeod, yes, he is number 3 in Pittsburgh, unless Juju Smith-Schuster comes back into action, so keep an eye on that. I think Bryan Edwards and Antoine Wesley, out of all these guys, are probably my next 2 favorite darts behind Zay Jones. Edwards always a threat for 3 to 5 targets, in this offense, but he will be playing across from Zay Jones. And again, it's just a situation where if we had to really take any quarterback to lead the way in pass attempts based on negative game script, I think Carr is probably that guy, pal. Antoine Wesley starting 3 wide receiver sets and cheaper than Rondale Moore for some reason, even though Rondale has not been starting or even playing over the past few weeks. And then finally, I think the single cheapest receiver you could go down to is Nelson Aguilar. Maybe the Patriots lean on 2 wide receiver sets. It's always tough to kind of tell where targets are going to come from, but just the discrepancy in price, I think, between Aguilar, Bourne, and Jacoby Myers, I don't think it's quite warranted. So, Andrew, thoughts on kind of the cheap wide receivers in general, and feel free to go wherever you want with it.
God, I cannot handle coaches playing these dusty veterans over these young players that continue just like they get on the field. All they do is catch touchdowns and they make big plays. And the coach is like, nah, man, we got to get this.
The Gabriel Davis story. That's what you're trying to say.
Gabriel Davis, is balling out. Emmanuel Sanders is coming back. So it's like, I don't even know. Like, I would love to come on here and say like, yeah, no, Davis is still going to, lead the team in routes run as he's done the last 2 weeks. But that's probably not going to happen. Like, it's probably going to be Emmanuel Sanders. He's going to be out there running wind sprints and it's going to be freezing out. That does nobody any good. Like, this game in Buffalo is going to be so cold that you want, if I was a wide receiver, I would want to be playing and running as many routes as humanly possible just so I can stay warm and not necessarily am sitting on the sideline. So any type of rotation they do, I don't think is actually smart. Like, they should, have the same guys in there the entire time. So yeah, it's unfortunate that, we could lose Jennings, who has quietly been, really productive for the 49ers, especially with Jimmy Garoppolo under center. He has a 16% target share, 5 targets per game over the last 5 weeks. He has 3 receiving touchdowns, and his target rate per route run, 24%, is actually the same as Deebo Samuel. So over the last 4 weeks, so he's getting hyper targeted, which I like. So even though he's running fewer routes, the difference between him and like Ayuk is not that much. So, I'm not really high on Ayuk this week. I'd rather just, play for Jennings. I think that you'll probably end up getting, similar production from the two guys, except that the prices is so much better with Jennings if there is indeed no Mohamed Sanu. I think McLeod makes sense as like a punt play just because he fits the role of, okay, Big Ben's going to throw the ball 50 times. They're going to be down. You check downs. Ray can get you there. It's a better game script for him and not necessarily like a Chase Claypool where he's the deep threat. And that's not what you want to be when Big Ben is your quarterback. It's just not a good look for Chase Claypool. And then I guess, one receiver you didn't mention, I think is just because he's priced a little bit above Zay Jones, is Cedric Wilson. Yeah. So he's at 4,400. So I think that he's like the best cheap receiver again, and going up a little bit from Zay Jones. He's filled in for Michael Gallup throughout the season. He has a 25% target rate per route run since week 15. He's got at least 35 receiving yards in 5 of his last 6 starts. And the 49ers defense, again, has been really banged up in the secondary, but specifically against slot receivers, which we see Cedric Wilson take over instead of seeing CeeDee Lamb in there when there is no Michael Gallup. 49ers ranked 29th in pass rating, 25th in catches allowed to slot wide receivers this season. So if you can't get up from Zay Jones, because I do think that we could see more from Renfrow in the specific matchup. I do think it was kind of weird to see Renfrow's just targets just like totally, go to the wayside with Waller back. So it wouldn't surprise me to see Zay Jones's target share maybe decline a little bit because Waller is back and Waller is going to get targets, especially in this matchup against the Cincinnati Bengals. So if I could finagle my way up to Cedric Wilson, I think he'd probably be I definitely have a lot more confidence in him than Zay Jones this week.
That's fair. And yeah, only $200 more. I think you can call Cedric the premier low price wide receiver if you still want to do that. Mid priced, whatever. But he really has been making the most out of his opportunities all year long. That Chiefs game, I think, for him was rough, but it was rough for a lot of guys out there. And I think just what he's shown them, we'll see if the Cowboys can bring back Gallup on an injury discount, after what's gone on there. But this is one of the, top 10 storylines I was kind of looking at ahead of this offseason, because on the Cowboys roster, CeeDee Lamb is obviously locked in, number 1 receiver of the present and future. But Cooper, if they want to move on, which maybe not with the Gallup thing, and Coop's, we know, a very good receiver in his own right, but they can save over $20 million against the cap if they release him after that June 1st. And literally everybody else in the offense is an unrestricted free agent, including Cedric Wilson. So we'll see what happens there, but there could be quite a bit of turnover in that Cowboys wide receiver room ahead of next year. Another note I wanted to go with is, Andrew, we'll see kind of how the ownership shakes out on this, but I think that, based on, which is fair, some of the matchups we're seeing, with the 49ers run game going against the Cowboys run defense that hasn't been doing much. I could see a lot of people, not trying to get to, he's plenty affordable, but locking in Elijah Mitchell at 5,500. You should be getting 20 touches. That's all fine and great. Don't sleep on these receivers, though, because it might not be as sexy as other offenses, but Jimmy G and this 49ers passing game, man, they really have been humming for the majority of the year. Second in yards per attempt. EPA's top 6. PFF passing grade is up there. Like, I get it. This is, I was complaining to Dwayne on the podcast I did this morning, about Schlereth hating on air yards. Air yards help us paint a great picture that can help us show why Jimmy G is not a top 5 quarterback, despite all these numbers that might suggest otherwise. But in fantasy, who gives a shit? We'll take the yards how we can get them. With that in mind, man, each of Debo, Ayuk, and Kittle, I think are more in play. And honestly, Kittle being down from 6,700 last week to 6K, that is just far too steep of a price decline. Debo's down 400 himself. I mean, Jimmy G only being $100 more than Big Ben, that is an insult, my friend. So let's make sure that, we got Trent Williams, doing his thing, and it does look like Sanu will be back out there. So getting healthy, hopefully at the right time in the highest game total of the week. So again, Andrew, I could see the allure of, stacking some of these different offenses that we know are going to be a little more pass happy. Maybe it's a little bit more of a defined pecking order at, in the passing game. With that said, man, I think something like Jimmy G, Kittle, and Debo, it could be a stack that we know is the upside, but it's going a little bit more under the radar than you might expect.
No, I mean, you hit the nail on the head. Garoppolo, when I sent you over, my notes, I put, Jimmy G question mark with, next to the GPP, because I'm thinking, hey, I think that he's actually in play here as a tournament quarterback. He's really cheap, especially in a week where you can leave a little bit of salary on the table just because you want to play the best players and you don't necessarily need to spend up all of your salary. His price discrepancy is significantly different from everybody else. And the biggest thing is who to stack him with. That's what I've been, having trouble with a lot of these quarterbacks where, I love Dak on the other side, but it's okay, so then who are you stacking him with? Because there's 5 different guys you can do it with. And what are the chances that you're going to hit on the right guys? Look at the target share with Lamb, Cooper, Dalton Schultz. Nobody has more than a 20% target share over the last 4 weeks. So you're trying to figure out which guy to play. And it's really tough, especially because none of them really had blown up. It's because it's been so spread out between all of the different Cowboys receivers where 49ers, we know who the 2 top dogs are. It's Deebo Samuel and it's George Kittle. And I think that this matchup too, you look at the Dallas defense, they rank 31st in yards after the catch allowed per reception this season. Kyle Shanahan, his bread and butter, we all know, is yak. It is yards after the catch. And especially, I think Kittle is really the guy I want to hone in on the most because
everywhere.
Yeah, because he's had the down games, especially even last week too, where the targets were there for him last week. He had a major target share boost. He had 10 receiving yards. That just sticks out as such an outlier performance where it's how is that even possible? The king of yards per route run, just totally floundered in this matchup. So, that's something I'm trying to pick up on is just these outlier performances where that doesn't make any sense. So I would expect that to regress to the mean. The Dallas defense, 29th yards after the catch per reception to tight ends specifically. And when you look at how they actually defend tight ends that line up in line, so like a George Kittle, where he's not really operating as a Darren Waller player or like a Kyle Pitts, where he's out in the slot, he's out wide. He's actually in line much more often, and that's where Dallas has given up the most production to tight ends. 4th in completions, 3rd in targets to tight ends, which is actually very similar to the Eagles. So I know that the Gronk is going to be the major play here as long as the weather can stay decent in Tampa Bay, and it makes sense. The Eagles are the worst team against tight ends, but there's a scenario where Kittle just outdoes Gronk because the matchup really, when you're looking at where they line up, is actually really good for Kittle as well. I just think that the rostership projection is not necessarily going to portray that. So Kittle, absolutely love him this week.
If there ever is a week to go to tight end, this is
100%.
Any of Kelsey, Gronk, Kittle. Let's get contrarian with Waller. Dalton Schultz doesn't have Gallup to worry about. Zach Ertz is the number 1 target in Arizona. Hell, Goddard and Freiermuth. You can talk yourself into literally each of the top 10 tight ends. So look at all these just great tight ends making it into the playoffs. Great day to be a great tight end. So we need to keep an eye on what's going on in Kansas City. Clyde Edwards-Helaire did not practice on Thursday. He is still coming back from the shoulder injury. Darrell Williams remains limited with his toe. So we'll see kind of what's going on there. But to see that downgrade from Clyde, that certainly would indicate that he could be on the wrong side of questionable, whereas Darrell could end up being out there. I think and if Clyde's out there, based on what we saw last time, I would expect him to lead the way. Last time he came back from his injury, he came right in, had 14 touches in a game where Darrell only had 6. Maybe we hear some more stuff near game time about this actually being an emergency only type situation. They did do that last year with that illness in week 14 or whatever it was. So if it'd probably be ideal if Clyde's out, because then, Andrew, we really could sink our teeth into Darrell Williams against the league's single worst defense in yards before carry, yards before contact allowed per carry. I've messed it up 3 times today. We know Darrell has that receiving role that we've always wanted them to give to CEH, but they just decided to give to Darrell instead. And my goodness, man, they're 12.5 point home favorites. As I was telling Dwayne, like the only way I can really see Pittsburgh like making this a game and maybe covering or winning is because the NFL is so random and weird sometimes that like, yeah, I guess this could happen. The Jaguars just beat the Colts. Why couldn't the Steelers hang around a little bit? But quantifiably, I can't freaking do it, man. So really keep an eye on Darryl, because when you look at these 5K running backs, Leonard Fournette at 5.9, Singletary 5.7, Mitchell 5.5, Sony 5.4, I think they all probably should be projected higher than these guys, but it's a 6-game slate, and we got to just be contrarian sometimes with this and take the running back that isn't projected as high, but we know still has the potential for multiple touchdowns. So good note from TJ Hernandez, who's been on this podcast before, does great work over at 4for4.com, but he mentioned how on his research, the average salary left on the table in 2-game slates is about $400. In your lineup on main slates, you rarely see winners have more than $200 on the table. So this is like one of those things that I just want to stress, because if you're building your lineup and you have, 5.9K left, like, okay, your first instinct is just to get Leonard Fournette there because Leonard Fournette is the better play than Clyde Edwards-Helaire, and you're not used to leaving that salary on the table. But on these smaller slates, that's one of the easiest way to differentiate your lineup is to purposely leave that salary on your table, particularly if you're not taking the biggest jump off ever. I'm not saying go from like Leonard Fournette to Boston Scott. I'm saying go from Leonard Fournette to whoever is the starting running back for the Kansas City freaking Chiefs. So I do think, again, playing that right in tournament and embracing some of that uncertainty, Andrew, could pay some dividends.
No, I think that makes a ton of sense. And I think that taking advantage of late swap makes a lot of sense too, especially if you are playing over the 6 games. I've had ideas of just fading, the Saturday games altogether. Just be like, I'm not going to play anybody on Saturday and just build my lineups based on Sunday and based on all the so I have all this information at my disposal based on what happened in Saturday's game. So if there's no like standout player that I should have an edge over all those teams that played guys on Saturday, where now I can now make my lineups based on the Sunday matchups. And honestly, like I don't love the Saturday games in particular. We have the Bengals and Raiders game, which I think that isn't necessarily super enticing. It just really depends on if we get Joe Burrow 500 passing yards. Like that's really how you get buried by that game. But the Bills and Patriots, it just this weather thing is just not something that is indicative of or suggesting of a high scoring affair where we have on Sunday we have games in domes, and on Monday night we have a game in a dome. Like we don't need to get super weird. It's like, look, like there are plenty of ways to get contrarian within a game that's inside a dome. And I'm just like thinking about like how would the Cardinals or Cowboys or any of these dome teams play if they had to go to Buffalo and like play in 0-degree weather? I just like cannot imagine like the insanity that they have to go through trying to prepare for that game. Whereas you at least have the Patriots and Bills, who are 2 teams that are used to playing in the cold weather. But we got Bart Scott giving a very interesting advice to Josh Allen about how he should stay loose and stay loose on the sideline, because apparently the dude's like feet are freezing or whatever like when he's playing in these games. So I think that's another way to look at it, just from a game theory perspective, is really leverage a late swap and use it to your advantage, especially if you're like torn between 2 players. You just take the guy that's playing later, because then you're gonna have more information to work with.
Yeah, speaking of some of that weather in Philly, Tampa, that seems to be the big one to worry about. We need to see when the wind and rain is really going to be coming. Again, none of us are meteorologists here, but we're trying to take what we can from those folks. It does seem like there's a chance that, things could be worse in the pregame than when it starts. Either way, there are going to be winds up to 20 mile per hour with a chance to gust to around 30 at some point on Sunday afternoon. Certainly not ideal. Also in Cincy and Buffalo, don't have quite the same level of wind risk, but the temperatures are going to be well below freezing when we kick off. So yes, Andrew, certainly feel a little bit better about, just embracing the dome life. I did think it was pretty funny. Mina Kimes had a great tweet that spurned, a lot of people, including myself, to add, our 2 cents. Where basically she was saying like, what's kind of the goofiest change you wish you could make in the NFL that you actually kind of think could improve the game. Let me get her exact words. What's your goofiest sports take that you actually kind of believe? Hers was, if the Bills want to truly get the most out of Josh Allen, they got to build a dome, which I thought was pretty hilarious, because if you do look at Josh, hasn't been the world's best quarterback, when he has actually been dealing with these high winds and low temperature, which I get it. Surprising. You would think a guy that can throw the ball out of the football stadium would be built for that type of weather. But in fact, he's been better in the dome, probably because every quarterback is better in the dome. Why the hell hell wouldn't you be? So final main overall point I wanted to go with, Andrew, I think it kind of dives into that tight end discussion we were having, but like Zach Ertz is a number one receiver at this point. You look at them in 3 games without DeAndre Hopkins. Ertz has 42 targets, Christian Kirk 32, AJ Green 25, Antoine Wesley 19, Chase Edmonds 15, James Conner 8, nobody else more than 4. So no, Rondale Moore hasn't been in there, and maybe that has allowed Ertz to play some more snaps in the slot than usual. But with that said, man, he really has looked good during his time in Arizona, and he's kind of due for what the kids would call positive touchdown regression. So I do think Ertz, sitting down there, what is he, only 4,700? Like, this is one of those things, like, if you want to look at everyone's salary and like projected targets, I mean, we're talking about Cedric and Zay Jones, who are probably going to be the number 3 options in their passing game. Like, they're only a couple hundred cheaper. Zach Ertz at 4,700, man. Again, if you just take the salary divided by projected targets, I think you'd be hard pressed to find someone that is a better value than Zach Ertz. So with this one, based on the spread, you would think the Cardinals might have to be playing from behind a little bit. And this is the Rams' weakness. Like, great secondary because of Jalen Ramsey, but he can't cover everyone. So they're 10th in yards per attempt allowed to targets aligned out wide, 24th when they're aligned in the slot, though, 22nd in line. So if you are going to attack this Cardinals offense, which is fair, we know Kyler Murray can win a slate, anytime he's out there. He gets a rushing touchdown or 2, ball game over, but it should look like Zach Ertz and Christian Kirk, both from a volume and a matchup standpoint, are the guys we should be targeting in Arizona.
Yeah, I agree. Those are the guys I was gravitating towards, because I think I like Murray a lot. If you're playing on that particular slate, if you're including the Monday night game against the Los Angeles Rams, I think that Kyler Murray, look, you want to have the mobile quarterbacks. And that's kind of what it came down to. I like Dak a lot, but question marks about whether or who I'm going to stack him with. He doesn't run as much as the other guys, and we see an uptick in mobility from all these players in the playoffs because they know that it's win or go home. So you want to be betting overs on all of these quarterback rushing lines when they come out, because chances are the quarterbacks are going to run because there's no holding back. It's the playoffs. It's win and go home. So I think that that's something to kind of keep in mind if you're really debating between a pocket passer like a Brady. Well, maybe you actually embrace the mobility of one of these mobile quarterbacks a little bit more. And also keep that in mind when you're stacking. Like, you don't need to double stack a mobile quarterback, especially on DraftKings, because of the PPR scoring. You don't need that. The PPR scoring and double stack, that's why Brady's such a good quarterback to double stack, because he just throws the ball so many times. Every pass attempt, results in a completion, which you get a point for. It's not the same in FanDuel or these other half-point PPR sites. So, embrace these mobile quarterbacks. I think value them a little bit higher, especially now the postseason's kicking off.
Couple other notes just to hit on before we move on to a little bit of player prop discussion. This Eagles offense is interesting, Andrew, because when they played the Buccaneers earlier this year, that was 2 weeks before they started making their true, just completely switching around their offense to become this run first unit. So in that game, we didn't really see them, attempt to really go against, this brick wall that has been the Buccaneers front seven for most of the year. But again, since then, the Eagles have really turned into not only the most run heavy offense, but a very productive run heavy offense as well. Meanwhile, Tampa Bay, they're probably getting Levante David back this week. We'll see. He is practicing, he's opened up that window and everything. But this was a group against the Patriots in week 4. The Buccaneers gave up -1 rushing yards. We were just completely fading running backs against these guys for weeks. But you look at over the past 5 games, 173 rushing yards to the Buffalo Bills, 150 to the New York Jets, 110 to a Carolina Panthers team that is, what the hell were they doing in week 18, So I do think that based on some of this weather, based on Miles Sanders hopefully being back and ready to take back, his lead back workload, where how many times can I say back in one sentence? Jesus. But with Sanders, when he came back from injury before, even if they were playing Scott and Jordan Howard as well, Sanders was still leaned on really as the feature back, seeing those 20+ touches. So, Andrew, we don't usually stack quarterbacks with running backs, but at the same time with Philly, based on them already being as run heavy as they are, based on the conditions, and maybe facing a lesser version of this Buccaneers front seven, Hurts and Sanders, man, they could combine for 35 rush attempts.
If I were to pick any, it's weird for me to say this, but if I could pick any upset it would honestly be Eagles over the Bucs. Like it's crazy to think that. And, again, but upsets happen in the wild card round, and against Tom Brady, it's really weird to try to bet against him. But, the fact that the weather is now potentially playing into the Eagles' favor. Yep. And you talk about the Buccaneers and their run defense, something interesting I kind of found out, doing some research on this game is, their explosive run rate allowed this season, the Buccaneers 16% ranks last in the league. Like they give up the highest rate of explosive rushes. And that's because, and part of that is because they put so much emphasis on, getting negative yardage to those running backs that they give up big plays because of it. They over pursue, and then that gets, running backs out in space into big plays. Like that's all Miles Sanders does is run big plays because he doesn't score touchdowns. He doesn't catch passes. So like we know those two things. So like getting Sanders back, especially now that he's not dealing with a lower body injury, like it's a hand injury. So if he plays, I think that he is really interesting in tournaments at 5,100. I don't think a lot of people are going to play him because you see Bucks and you're like, no, take him out of my player pool. But the Buccaneers give up a lot of explosive runs, and particularly when you mentioned, against the Jets, against the Bills, we saw a lot of rushing from the quarterbacks. Josh Allen, I believe, had over 100 rushing yards against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. So yeah. Hurts is going to be involved, and really like you're stacking Hurts and Miles Sanders together because you're just betting on, I think the Eagles are going to overpower this Buccaneers run defense. You look at PFF's offensive defensive line matchup chart. Who's the number one matchup advantage this week? Eagles over the Buccaneers defensive line. So there's a lot weighing in the favor. And if the Eagles are running the ball effectively, Brady's not on the field. And that's how you beat Brady. You don't beat Brady because your defense is good. Like that's not going to happen. Like you beat Brady if he's not on the field. Like that's how they win. And it's just kind of shaping up like a game script where you could see them kind of running the football effectively, overwhelming them and keeping Brady off the field. And that's how they come away with the win. So count me in on the Eagles plus whatever it is, +9 or whatever they're favored for or underdogs by. But yeah, I think Hurts in DFS is a really awesome play.
Man, some of these running back prices, like that's the point I was trying to make with the Chiefs guys too, because they're almost daring you just to play Fournette, Mixon, and even like Elijah Mitchell with some of the price drops. Like Mixon at 6,800, he's been under 7K since October. Elijah Mitchell was 6K last week when we didn't even know if he was going to be out there taking his usual workload. Leonard Fournette, like bro, he was 7,600 the last time he was expected to go out there being the starting running back. He's now 5,900, and Ronald Jones probably isn't even going to be playing. So just again, if you want to look at this rationally, then you be hard pressed to not rank these guys as your top 3. And in cash games, go right ahead. But tournaments, it's a 6-game slate. Weird stuff happens. That's why you got to get off some of these guys. So Andrew, any final kind of thoughts here? Again, you have your DFS cheat sheet out for everyone on Friday, correct?
Yep. That was coming out. That's out on Friday. So it has kind of my thoughts, feelings, emotions about every single player that I kind of think is in play here. I know we didn't really talk about, I guess, if you want to hit on defense, I don't really have any other takes on any of the other players. I'm just kind of looking over my list here. I think we kind of hit on most of the guys. I mean, I think like Fournette, though, in particular, I feel like he just could catch, again, like so many passes in this game. The Eagles' third most receptions allowed to running backs. He was already the dude was averaging like 8 targets a game, and that was with Antonio Brown and Chris Godwin in the offense. So I mean, Fournette, we'll talk about it in the props, but, pounding whatever his receiving thing is over, especially if the weather is bad. It's like just going to be dump offs from Brady 24/7 to Lombardi Lenny. So
yeah, in terms of looking at the defense real quick, you can always check out my mismatch manifesto on PFF.com. One of the things I do is I combine the pressure rate from the offensive line with the defensive line, try to, find out where the freaking big mismatches are, hence the name of the article. And really the Sunday from San Fran on, I don't think we should be targeting really any of those defenses. I know it might be tempting to fire up the Chiefs at Arrowhead and, maybe they do wreak havoc and everything. But like the one thing that Big Ben does, I don't even want to say well, but he does do it, is get rid of the ball as quick as possible. Like he has the fastest release time in the league. And because of that, they've only allowed the 3rd highest pressure rate in the NFL, despite that being a bad offensive line. So like with Ben, he still makes turnover worthy plays for sure. I'm not saying that can't happen, but he almost just like, he'll throw a dump off to Najee and lose 4 yards before he's actually going to stand in there and take a sack or lose the fumble that you're hoping for. So I think, and based on, again, these pressure numbers, the big three defenses to potentially look at, the Buccaneers, I agree with Andrew. If there had to be an underdog that we had to really ride with, I think the Eagles are certainly capable. With that said, if Brady and company can get up 2 scores early in this game, we're going to have a lot of Jalen Hurts dropping back, and he's going to be doing it against the number 1 defense in the NFL and havoc. Like, you know, you said it, Andrew, they're always trying to create these negative plays. That is what we look for in a fantasy defense. So if you want to throw in some rain and bad weather into that, I think the Buccaneers defense makes a lot of sense. Just really try to be careful with your correlations with that. And then also, I think this opening game, the Raiders and the Bengals, could even go both ways, man. Look, it's hard to look at Joe Burrow over these past 2 weeks and think of he's anything other than one of the best quarterbacks in the game. We do have a slightly longer sample on his NFL career, and we've seen games this year where he takes a shit ton of sacks. You look at the Chargers game in week 13, he took 6 sacks. Next week against the 49ers, he took 5. Hell, over the past 3 weeks, he's taken 3 and 4 sacks in these games. If Max Crosby and company, if they want any chance of winning, it's going to come down to them beating the piss out of that offensive line and really forcing them into these, you know, long down and distance situations where you would think they can tee off on them. So I do like the Raiders defense and trying to get a little contrarian there because, again, I think what's sticking to everyone's mind is how damn explosive these Bengals have been over the past few weeks. And on the flip side of things, I think the Bengals obviously against Derek Carr and Trey Hendrickson, they should be able to wreak some havoc as well. I'm just a little, you know, with Carr, we do see him kind of have a little more of a Roethlisberger to his game, be able to get rid of the ball quicker. I don't think he's quite as prone to some of those boneheaded plays. So I would say Raiders and Tampa Bay defenses, top 2 of the week.
Yeah, I like the Raiders DST. I talked about them for the kind of the same reasons you mentioned. I think if you're playing like only the Saturday slate, if you just need a cheap defense, you know, if you're playing cash games like the Patriots, it makes sense. Just like it's going to probably be not a super high scoring game. You know, Josh Allen can sometimes go too far ahead of himself and turn the ball over. So, and the Patriots have a good defense. Like we talk about this all the time. Like last week, Miami was a good play because they were at home, number 1, and they're just a good defense. So I think the Patriots, they're a good defense and they're cheap. I think they make sense. And then the same thing with the Rams. Like, why are the Rams cheaper than the Cardinals? I get like Matthew Stafford throws picks like left and right, but the Rams are favored at home and they're cheaper than the defense that they're playing, which doesn't make any sense. So Rams DST, again, a real life good defense at home. I actually like the Rams more than the Patriots. I think they're like $100 more to get 2,800, 2,700 on the 6-game slate. So yeah, and I think that the Rams make a ton of sense. They're playing on Monday night.
Is Matt Stafford getting a little too much shit from everybody? I mean, they just went 12-5. He threw 41 touchdowns, like 4,800 yards. He led the league in interceptions. I understand that's not ideal, but I feel like everyone's like, what's the difference between Stafford and like 2018 Jared Goff? And it's like, that's a fair point, but Jared Goff like hasn't always been terrible, man. So I don't know. I guess it's probably partially PFF's doing, adding some context so we aren't just going off of passing touchdown numbers. But I was just surprised looking through some of the stuff this week. Like, damn, Stafford really did put up some high quality numbers. For Tom Brady, we're using those high quality numbers as a MVP case. For the love of God, I'm not trying to compare Stafford to Tom Brady. Just saying, remember to have some context with everything we do. Andrew, you have a ton of props for the people. Quickly, though, I do want to direct everyone to our player prop tool on PFF.com, where you can actually get our projections versus the props on the market. And we actually just tell you the straight up edge that you'll be getting with them. And I hope you like quarterback rushing totals because Lord knows we have a bunch of them. I'm just going to read off again our bets that have over a 10% edge in their direction, depending on your book, your bookie, whoever the hell you use to put your bets down. I know it can be, different. You might not have all these available, but if you do, it might just be a great day to be great. So Jimmy Garoppolo over 2.5 rushing yards. We have a 20.3% edge on that one. Tom Brady over 2.5 passing touchdowns at plus 158. Love that. 19.4% edge. Keep an eye on the weather, but I do like that. Tom Brady over 1.5 rushing yards. You have not lived until you have bet the over on quarterback rushing yards, people. It is just so electric when you see them take off on that 3rd and long and pick up like 4 yards. Chase Claypool, under 3.5 receptions. You're getting plus odds on that. We'll see about the volume, but especially if Juju comes back, might not be a bad idea. Kyle Juszczyk, over 7.5 receiving yards. Who wouldn't love to bet on the fullback? Deebo Samuel, under 28.5 rushing yards. That's a pretty gaudy line, man. And it could be a situation, I think, where we see San Fran forced to pass a little more than we're used to. Cameron Brate, under 1.5 receptions at plus 140 odds. I love that. Elijah Mitchell, over 8.5 receiving yards. Zach Ertz, under 4.5 receptions at plus money. Patrick Mahomes, over 2.5 touchdowns. And finally, Ben Roethlisberger, under 0.5 interceptions if you're feeling absolutely crazy out there on Sunday. Andrew, last week, 1-1. The Cowboys inexplicably left Zeke in for like the whole game. And I mean, and also Tony Pollard was ruled out before we got to even talk about it. So I think that was more of a unlucky case of you not having all the information at your disposal. By the time it went out, you were able to nail Stephon Diggs going relatively bonkers and at least went over that 65.5 receiving yard prop. So let's get into it. What do you got for the people?
Yeah, I mean, that's why they call it gambling. I took a gamble hoping that Zeke wouldn't play that much. And instead
that's why they call it that. Okay.
Instead, I got Zeke against backup running back or backup defenders and second stringers. So, of course, he was going to have his best game since week 5. But I digress because I'm going right back to Zeke under. And and I want to be specific about these lines. So again, a lot of the props I talk about are on Prize Picks. I will mention a couple on Underdog, which also has some pick'ems. Underdog was a friend of the show and our sponsor in 2022. As a spoiler alert, they will be talked about on the show in later episodes. But so Zeke's rushing yards prop on Underdog is at 55.5. It's at 47.5 on Prize Picks. So obviously you want to get, if you're taking the under, you want to take the higher line. I'm going with Zeke under 55.5 rushing yards. It's higher than it was last week, and it's basically for all the same reasons I took the under last week. He hasn't, eclipsed that since, the beginning of the season. Tony Pollard should be coming back. So I do think that Elliott under 55.5 rushing yards. The 49ers run defense is legit. Sony Michel had 21 carries last week and didn't even get 50 rushing yards.
Yeah, bad. Cam Akers got shut down too.
Zeke is not going to be moving whatsoever against a defense that's actually trying. I pointed out specifically in my article this week that he's actually going to be playing starters and guys we know about in the NFL and not backups on the Eagles. So going back to the Zeke, I'm not afraid. No PTSD for me on Zeke. I'm going under on Zeke for his rushing yards. On Prize Picks, some other ones, again, keep an eye out on just Bills and Patriots, things that are still kind of floating in the ethers. Most of them have been bet down significantly since, the start of the week just because of the weather and people are more informed. But some of the ones that have kind of new that have come out, you're specifically on receptions over on Prize Picks. So Chase Claypool, you just mentioned he was at 3.5. You can get him at 4 on Prize Picks. So I think that's a really easy one. And then what you can do, what's cool in the player props tool is you can adjust the lines based on your odds and based on the number itself. So you can actually do it and it will calculate the edge. So, if I go in and adjust Chase Claypool to 4 receptions, and now the edge goes to 23.3% as opposed to 16% at 3.5. So it makes it even better. You can be like, oh man, this is even much better of a bet. So I think Chase Claypool under 4 receptions makes sense. Jalen Reagor under 12.5 receiving yards. I don't even know why they put out lines on Reagor because the dude just isn't involved in the offense whatsoever. I know he played more last week because the Eagles backups were playing, but that's what I'm saying. He's a backup at this point. He's still running behind guys like Quez Watkins now. The Eagles, as we've talked about, they could just run the ball the entire time. And we have weather concerns. I mean, look, Reagor, if I lose to Jalen Reagor, okay, shame on me. But it's I feel like I'm betting on an under for J.J. Arcega-Whiteside. They're just
He has multiple games with negative receiving yards. I'm not counting his other multiple goose eggs, man. It's ridiculous.
Yeah, so Jalen Reagor, he has not denied me yet in taking his under, so I'm going to go under on Jalen Reagor. It's a 12.5 receiving yards, but honestly, whatever number you can get is fair game. It's more. He really should be at 0. Is really what his over under should be at. And then probably a more bold one here. The last one on Prize Picks I'll talk about. Or actually, this one you can parlay because Prize Picks you need to pick at least 2 guys. So Jacobs over 3 receptions, Jamar Chase under 5 receptions. The Bengals are a RB funnel defense in terms of giving receptions to the running back. Jacobs has been one of the more involved pass catchers in his offense. He's really taken on a larger role in the receiving game, so I like him over 3 receptions. Jamar Chase, Look, man, like he just absolutely, if you fade Ja'Marr Chase, you get buried sometimes, but it's because of the explosive big plays he makes. Like he hasn't even led his team in target share when T. Higgins has been on the field. He's not necessarily a guy that vacuums up a lot of targets. And we look at the Raiders, their strengths are against the pass. Like they've been really good at limiting explosive plays this year. They're actually second in explosive play rate or route, or the fewest explosive plays allowed per drop back. So I think Ja'Marr Chase, he's kind of an interesting guy to potentially fade in DFS this week. Especially because he does play on the first game. So at least you'll know, like, from after the first game, well, I faded Chase and that worked, or it didn't. All right, now I can spend my weekend doing something else. So I kind of like just like rip the Band-Aid off, fade Chase, see what happens, and then you can move on with the rest of your weekend. And the last one here is, okay, yeah, so that's it for prize picks. Underdog, I know I mentioned Zeke, the under there. It's also at 47.5 on prize picks. So if you don't want to switch platforms, I think it's still a good number there. I bet it on prize picks as well. Mac Jones is still at 207 passing yards. That's still just too high of a number for Jones, playing in Buffalo. Buffalo quarterbacks that have gone to Buffalo this season have averaged 140 passing yards. I know that it's somewhat skewed because of the Mac Jones, 19-yard game. You take out that game, okay, it's 155 passing yards that opponents have averaged.
They've been so good, man. They're number one in like every pass defense category you can find.
Yeah, so you don't want any type of passing numbers. Again, it's going to be a run-heavy approach. That's what New England is going to be going into the game, what they want to do. The Bills' defense is definitely weaker against the run than the pass. Pair that with Nelson Aguilar under 27.5. Again, any guy that, again, if you can find a receptions prop on him, I like that better, just because he catches deep passes. But I have reservations about guys with, questionable hands catching balls in, 0-degree weather. That ball hurts. I think Stephon Diggs was talking about that. And that's why Josh Allen's numbers are down at home, is because his receivers are like, dude, like, take some heat off the ball. Like, you're like killing my hands. I mean, think about it. Like, Diggs played in a dome most of his career in Minnesota. Gabriel Davis played at Florida, or USC, University of Central Florida. So you have a bunch of these guys that, are used to kind of playing in warm weather, and they're like, dude, like, so like, it doesn't affect Josh Allen. His arm strength can obviously overcome the elements, but I don't know if his receivers are necessarily built for it. Dawson Knox, when he played at Buffalo against the Patriots, he had that terrible game where he's like dropping passes left and right. So any like unders on receptions, I think that Kendrick Bourne is at 3 receptions. I think that's a solid underplay for that Sunday night game, or excuse me, that Saturday night game, Bills Patriots. Mike Evans under 76.5 receiving yards. Darius Slay is one of the few cornerbacks I think can actually go toe-to-toe with Mike Evans. We talked about Fournette coming back. We talked about the Eagles are very strong on the perimeter, 3rd fewest passing yards allowed to perimeter wide receivers. And I just think it's going to be the Gronk fest. The Eagles are just really bad against running backs and really bad against tight ends. Like, that's where targets should funnel. And Evans, even though there's no Godwin, there's no Antonio Brown, like, he still hasn't like captured like this massive target share really at any point all season. Like, even last week, it was Gronk that led the team in targets. Now, Evans is not necessarily a guy I would totally fade if the weather checks out, because he catches a touchdown. Like, that's what he did last week. He caught 2 touchdowns. So I like him more on like DFS, but from like a yardage standpoint, I think you could see him going under here. So he's at 76.5 on underdog.
Yeah, those targets from last week were pretty surprising. I know Gronk's incentives had a little something to do with it there, but Gronk, 10 targets. Evans, 7. Tyler Johnson, 7. Rashad Perryman, 6. Cam Brate sneaking in there with 3 himself. Yeah, I mean, it's one of these things too, Andrew. Like, you've gone back and you've given us a good amount of overs and, unders as well. But I do think usually the sharper move is the under. Why? Because we all want to bet on overs. It's more fun to hope for things to happen than to hope for things not to happen. But that could just be a little bit too high of a line. So good stuff, as always, from you, Andrew. Everyone can find your work on PFF.com. We got the cheat sheet and plenty of other goodness throughout the week. Fantasy football rankings, buy low and sell high targets based on high value opportunities, and looking at how to leverage PFF routes run in NFL free agency and wild card weekend DFS to go along with his best early super wild card weekend player props and bets. So Andrew, appreciate you as always, and appreciate you, all you listeners out there tuning in to PFF Fantasy Football Podcast. We'll be back Friday afternoon talking all things injury ahead of playoff football. We're here. We made it. I can't wait. So for Andrew, I'm Ian. Until next time, take care, everybody.